What is it that you're most misunderstood about?
I would think the consciousness thing, probably. The trouble is that's a murky subject, and probably I'm not sure I should have got into it at all. It's a good question. I think I'm glad I did. But it came about mainly from talks. You see, this was one of the 3 courses I went, which were nothing to do when I was a graduate student in Cambridge, and I went to 3 courses that were nothing to do with my subject. One was by Herman Bondi on general relativity, one was by Paul Dirac on quantum mechanics, big influence on me, clearly, and the third one was by a man called Steen on mathematical logic. And I learnt about the Gödel theorems, and I found it absolutely stunning, because I had sort of vaguely heard that Gödel's theorem showed that there are things in mathematics you couldn't prove. I didn't like the idea very much, but then when I heard what it actually said, I found this stunning, because what it says, you make a sentence, and this sentence says, it's clever to make it do it, but you make this sentence say, in effect, I am not provable by those rules. And that's what it says. So you say, well, maybe it's false. And if it's false, it is provable by the rules, and therefore it's true and not provable by the rules. Amazing. So how do you make it do that? Well, that's the trick, of course. But what I found remarkable is that how do you know it's true? You know it's true not because of the rules that you're using, but because you believe that those rules only give you truths. And what's the point of using these rules as methods of proof if you don't trust the rules? Why is it proof anyway? Why is it something which you believe to be true? Only because you trust the rules. But if you trust the rules, then you can prove this other statement, which is based on your belief that the rules only give you truths, but you can't obtain that using the rules. In fact, it wouldn't be much good if you did use the rules, because you have to know that the rules only give you truths in order to trust the conclusion. So you have to understand why the rules only give you truths. So then I'm going to think, well, what does understanding mean? I mean, what are you doing? Well, it seemed to me, whatever it is, it seems to involve consciousness. I mean, the very term understanding, you wouldn't really say an entity understands something unless it's aware of it. That's normal usage of the language. So to understand something, you have to be aware of it. So for some reason, the awareness of things gives you something beyond what you could achieve with computers. So that is a view which I held then and still hold, which is more relevant than ever now, of course, because people talk about AI, which is already a misnomer as far as I'm concerned. It's not artificial intelligence. It may be artificial cleverness or something, but it doesn't involve any understanding. You're just following the rules. And the argument that I'd convinced myself, learning from Mr. Steen about the mathematical logic, was to say that the understanding of why the rules work is something which is not a computational thing. What is it if it's not computational? Well, it's something to do with consciousness. Now, you see, I don't know anything about what I wrote my book, The Emperor's New Mind, to try and express this point of view. And I learned a bit of neurophysiology, thinking that if I learned enough neurophysiology, I would find out somewhere what it is that, you see, I'd formed the view. Yes, I have to backtrack a little bit. I formed the view thinking of all the laws of physics. You see, I'm a physicalist, so I believe whatever is going on in our heads is following the laws of physics. But what are the laws of physics? Well, the laws of physics, Newtonian mechanics does pretty well, but then you have to go further than that. You have to have Maxwell's equations. You have to talk about special relativity, general relativity, and quantum mechanics. Well, but all these things although there's a little bit of an incompleteness in the argument. You see, all these theories depend on the continuum. And there could be a catch there, that something is not based on the continuum. But the continuum seems to be how you can approximate. You can approximate the continuum and calculate very accurately. Even with that time, there weren't good calculations on general relativity, but I realized that was still a computational problem. And nowadays, people do great things with calculators on computing what happens with black holes spiraling into each other and things like that, which is pretty impressive. So sure, that's things you could put on a computer. General relativity, as well as Newtonian mechanics, Maxwell's equations, all these things you can put on a computer. Quantum mechanics, well, the Schrödinger equation, you can put that on a computer. Maybe lots of variables you have to worry about and so on and so forth. But still, it's still the same sort of thing. How about the collapse of the wave function? Well, that seemed to be the gap that maybe is where one needs a gap in this whole discussion. And that's the only gap that I know of. It could be there's something else, of course, that we don't know in physics, but that seems to be an important gap. And collapse of the wave function. You see, many people, including Wigner, I remember talking to Wigner when I was in Princeton. And I remember I had dinner with him and
Yes.
discussing this question with him, because one of the views attributed to Wigner was that it's the conscious being observing the quantum system which collapses the wave function. So it requires consciousness to make the collapse work. I talked to him a bit, and he was not so dogmatic as people tend to think about this. He said that was a view that he played with and thought it was a possibility. I didn't think it was at all likely for all sorts of reasons. Seems to me that I had this argument about a distant planet, which is an Earth-like planet, and the weather on that planet, there's no life. It just never got started. And there's no butterfly to flap its wings and cause the weather to do this or that. It's just a quantum mixture of all the different weathers it can possibly have. And there's no conscious observer to look at it, so it's just a quantum superposition of all these different alternatives. So the space probe, which travels out, takes a photograph of all this superposition of all these different weathers. And when it gets back to Earth or close to Earth, it sends a signal to the Earth and says, this is the photograph I've just taken. And somebody sitting looking at a screen sees this superposition of weathers. First time a conscious being has seen it, whoop, suddenly it becomes one weather. Doesn't make any sense. So that's not what I believe. It's not that consciousness causes the collapse of the wave function. My view is almost the opposite. It's that whatever consciousness is, it depends on the collapse of the wave function. That there is the only thing which I could see which was not obviously computable. Okay, the way we do it is we just introduce a randomness, but that, I would argue, is an approximation, that there is something going on which is not just explained by randomness. But I don't have a solution to that question, but it did it was my entry into the consciousness discussion. And I wrote my book, The Emperor's New Mind, to try and explain this point of view. I had no answer. I remember getting to the end thinking I would learn about the Hodgkin-Huxley nerve transmissions and I would learn enough about that to see what the answer might be. No, I didn't. So I just sort of tapered off at the end with something I didn't really believe. And that was the end of the book. But later on, I learned from Stuart Hameroff about microtubules, which I thought were much more likely. Something in microtubules could easily be more likely, but the subject is not something. It involves biology. I don't understand about biology. I can't remember the names that people keep using, and they talk about different chemical processes, and or beyond me. So,
Right.
so it's not something that I feel I could develop thinking in. So I mean, I did have lots of discussions with people, but the discussions sort of went off in different directions and not anything which I could really contribute to. I think there's interesting aspects about the collapse of the wave function, most of which I didn't know at the time, but thinking about later, there's something extremely puzzling about how it works with regard to time. And this puzzlement could easily have relevance to conscious perception and things like this. So I think there's a story there which is worth exploring, but it's not really an area which I can never remember the names that people talk of, the chemicals which are involved and so on. And it's not the kind of thing I can do. So I'm happy for other people to follow these lines up, except that I don't think they've got very close as yet.